Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. So sit back, relax, and if you're new here, subscribe, and alright. Anyways, let's get into the first story. These events occurred 2 summers ago in the Grand Teton area. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, let's call him H, was an avid outdoorsman and also served in the military. I was an ecology major and wanted to spend more times outdoors, so he decided to take me on my first backpacking trip. Just the 2 of us. For those who aren't familiar, the Grand Tetons are well known for their wildlife, specifically grizzly bears. My only experience with bears up to this point was watching a little black bear cross the road from the safety of my car. Seeing grizzly country signs around every corner wasn't doing much to calm my nerves. The first incident. My boyfriend looked like Indiana Jones, machete hanging from his belt, large knives attached to each side of his pack, bear spray strapped to his waist. You get the picture. The beginning of our 25-mile journey was all uphill. When in bear country, you're supposed to make noise as to not startle the wildlife by accidentally sneaking up on it. As you can imagine, going up a steep hill while carrying a 40-pound pack makes it difficult to make conversation. We were an hour in, and almost at the top of the ascent, I noticed that the woods had gone completely silent, save for the rushing stream that was to our left of the trail. Silent woods are never a good sign. They usually indicate predators nearby. At this point, I was in front of my boyfriend and we were about to crest the hill. For the past 20 minutes, we had not said a word to each other, having been too tired to speak. We noticed the silence at the time and gave each other knowing glances. I came up over the top of the hill and immediately froze. Sitting not 10 feet in front of me, in the middle of the trail, was a grizzly bear. My husband wasn't aware yet, and he was behind me, so I did the first thing I could think of. While still in my frozen stance, I managed to take my arm and started flinging it wildly behind me, trying to get H's attention. I was too terrified to speak. The bear went from sitting to all fours, not looking away from us once. H quickly swung me around so that I was behind him, and he just started yelling. Being in the military, he knows how to yell. The grizzly wasn't quite phased as it started to walk slowly towards us. At this point, I was on the verge of passing out from terror. This bear was about 5 feet in front of us when we heard a loud crack coming from the woods to our right. The bear heard it too, and he bolted towards the stream. A second crack boomed again, this time much closer than before. H said it's probably just some falling branches, but we both knew that wasn't just the case. At this point, we were walking quickly up the trail in an attempt to create some distance from the grizzly and those strange noises. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up, and at the same moment, H stopped moving in front of me. He turned around to look at me, and I turned to look behind me. To this day, we are not sure what we saw. Back where we were standing was a large, black or brown mass. It looked to be 3 times bigger than the already large grizzly that we had seen just a few moments before. Its back was facing us, and then it stood on its back legs. It looked similar to a bear, but something about the shape was just off. At this point, it was probably stupid to run away, but that is exactly what we did. We were aware of heavy footsteps behind us, but neither of us looked back. The footsteps eventually faded. At this point, I was a mess. H was doing his best to console me. Honey, this is extremely unusual. The bears usually stay away from humans. We are gonna be okay. I'm sure that won't happen again. That was enough to convince me to continue on the backpack. Not another hour later though, we reached a clearing where we decided to take a rest and eat a snack. About a minute after we had sat down, I noticed bushes moving in a line towards the clearing towards us. Out of the brush comes this adolescent grizzly who looks just as spooked as I'm sure we did, but he came straight for us. H, being the crazy nut that he is, decided to charge back at the bear while screaming and bear spray at the ready. That did the trick and the bear ran off. all I could think was just my luck. But that wasn't even close to what happened the second night. Second night. Before we began our backpacking, we had to let the ranger station know which trails and route we planned to take. With this information, they usually send a ranger on horseback at some point during the backpacking to check on you to make sure everything is okay. There were not many approved trails left for us to choose from, and it was just our luck that they were the most difficult. Apparently, over the 3 days we were on those trails, we had been the sole hikers. We didn't see a single other person once we were en route. Anyhow, I guess we missed the ranger who came to check on us. We had been following hoof prints the entire second day, and we hadn't seen any the day before. I had some foot problems, so we spent valuable daylight trying to adjust my boot, laces, and socks to compensate for my pain. When we started on the trail again, we had maybe an hour or two of daylight left, and in the woods it gets dark fast. I was exhausted. It was now dark out, and H was the only one with a working headlamp, as mine wouldn't even turn on for some reason. We needed to find somewhere to set up camp, as we still needed to eat. It was freezing and the wind was blowing hard. It was creating a howling sound as it rushed through the trees, which made it difficult to hear H or discern any other sounds coming from the woods. After another hour of hiking through the dark, we found a clearing. Well, it was more like a bowl. It looked to be 200 meters in diameter, with the sides being 10 meters down from the trail to the bottom of the clearing. This place was strange. We both felt it, though he didn't tell me how freaked out he was till after we had left. There was no moonlight, so all we had was the illumination from his headlamp, our small camp stove, and the flashlight that I had fished from my pack. Half of the trees were dead or fallen just in the bowl. The vegetation everywhere else was very dense. To help alleviate my anxiousness, he started playing Ninja Sex Party out of his portable speaker. This didn't help much, as it just echoed off the trees, creating a dissonant sounds. He also thought it would ward off any predators nearby. This is when we knew our anxiousness wasn't paranoia. The silence was back. There hadn't been a single bird chirp since we arrived at the clearing. It also may have had to do with the obnoxious music, but because of our previous experience, we decided to turn off the music and head into the tent. Also, it was freezing. As soon as we were situated in our sleeping bags, we heard deep cracks and thuds echoing from beyond the tree line. Falling trees? There had been a lot of wildfires and very little rain this season. Thud. We both froze. That sound wasn't an echo. It came from inside the clearing. Definitely not a falling tree. Thud. It came from right outside our tent. We both stopped breathing. H's hand found mine, and we clung to each other, paralyzed. Something dragged across the outside of our tent, making an indent as it went along. It was thin, almost like a finger. "What is it?" I whispered, shaking. "I don't know. Shouldn't be a person. We're the only ones on this side of the mountain." I was trying my hardest to stifle sobs, trying to listen to what was outside. I could hear steps, but couldn't decipher what it was. The steps stopped, and then the whole side of the tent was slowly pushed inwards. At this point, whatever was outside knew we were inside, so I shined my flashlight at the side of the tent. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was the shape of a human face pressed into the tent wall. I could make out the nose and an open mouth. Each time they breathed in made the tent around their mouth billow in and out. H said, "Fuck that," and pulled a Glock from his sleeping bag. He cocked it, and the sound shattered the silence. The face pulled back, and we heard fast footsteps heading towards the edge of the clearing. We didn't leave the tent till the sun was shining the next morning. The first thing we noticed was the smell of urine. We came out of the tent and looked around. Whoever it was had peed on our coals. We had left it in the fire, leaving a disgusting stench of evaporated pee. Footprints surrounded our tent, circling around multiple times. Muddy handprints decorated the outside of our tent. We think it was mud anyway. The takeaway? Wildlife is not the most dangerous thing in the backcountry. I used to work on the north slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil producing qualities. It was around mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet, and when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished and were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out of for safety. No cell reception and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 in the morning, not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow as the speed limit on the roads is only about 25 miles an hour. When something appeared on the road in their headlights, it was a man in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket, walking down an ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m. and it was negative 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off of him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had had enough of this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him though, this walking popsicle spun around and lashed onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude still had a hold on my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guy in the cab held onto my buddy to keep him aside. After several moments, if could only have been a few seconds at most, my buddy tore free from this guy and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard and were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at this shack, we asked him if he ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us they searched up and down that road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing, not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste his shift driving around, but it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that, and who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude, if he even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I'll work to write down more of my experiences and share them to the appropriate subs. This happened when I was growing up around 2004 or 2005 when I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area a good ways outside the town of Uvalde, Texas. The town itself was really small back then and not much to look at, and it's one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 1,000 acres, I think, down outside of that area and was complaining about a ton of hogs that were tearing up their land. Being open season on hogs in the south, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting for them. Not only did that help him with networking for his job, but also gave us some quality father-son time. I remember that drive down there from Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler. That car was so uncomfy, I hated it. All I had to do was either stare out my window or try and beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth. The drive obviously took most of the day, so we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hadn't had anyone else lease it that year yet, and the cabin in the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in scouts for a couple years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So after unlocking the gate and driving to the cabin on the land, we settled in. The cabin was pretty rough, dust and dirt everywhere. Flies. I remember that it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the cabin and crapped on the floor. After cleaning up a bit and getting the sleeping bags out, then setting up the cots, we decided to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I never was able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I had the feeling of being watched. I was finally able to drift off for what I guess was an hour, maybe. When we woke up, it was early, about 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was the summer and horribly hot in the afternoon, so morning was the best time to be out and about. After walking for an hour or so, we came to an area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hogs, typically torn up ground where they had been rooting, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was there, not to mention the gate was locked up when we first arrived. The person was wearing some bright colored red jacket. We slowly walked toward them. My dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person didn't move at all, dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that he was turned away from us with his hands in his pockets. Weird thing was that the person was in a ski jacket and what looked like to be ski pants. Now this is Texas in the summer. It was about 98 degrees outside by then. My dad called out again, no reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnap the clip to his pistol holster. That's all we had at the time since we were only scouting the area. The rifles were back at the cabin. We approached the person's right side and then my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed and crouched down, watched him circle around to the front of the man, all while talking to him, asking if he was okay. He finally passed around to the front of the man and my dad stood straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out and said, "What's wrong?" And he called back saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad stood there staring, and as I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new. No dust, no sap, no bird droppings, no signs of being outside for more than a day at most. At that moment, I looked at my dad and could see him get worried. Almost immediately after, I felt that feeling too, like we were being watched, and I knew my dad felt it too. I wanted to start crying. I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the whole way back while I was trying to hold back panicked tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was terrified, so it felt like an eternity, but in reality it was only about 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and beat feet. We drove back home that day and didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he was confused. He said that he would go check it out next week when he was in the area. He also said that he had never had an issue with people because his property was high fenced. My dad normally isn't a paranoid person, but me being young and the lease possibly having someone there we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked, and my dad wasn't able to sleep the night before as well. He had the same feeling, but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping too. Turns out that next week, he got a call from his buddy, and he checked the whole property and never found a trace of anyone, no mannequin or anything. This story still makes my hair stand on end. No idea what that was, but the paranoid man in me thinks it was some kind of trap or something. Not the creepiest thing that ever happened to me in the woods, but def top 3, so whoever was out there, I'm glad we never met. And anyways, this will be a shorter-ish video. I mean, it's not that short, but please let me know down below. Do you like long Reddit stories video or short Reddit stories video, or a mix of both? Because I really don't know which ones you guys prefer more, long videos or short videos. So please comment that down below, what you would like to see in the future. And anyways, I hope you enjoyed the stories. I enjoyed reading them. And let me know what you'd like to see in the future, and subscribe and like. It helps the channel a lot. Thank you so much for watching to the end. And yeah, until next time, see ya.